Hallo und willkommen. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me, Silke Learn German, for this new video. So in today's session I'm going to share some techniques and some tips with you for learning the genders of German nouns. Okay, so just before we start, just a bit of background information. So why have I decided to put this video together? It is something that a lot of my learners have asked me about and do always ask me about. Have you got any tips? How can I learn the genders of nouns, and does it really matter? So the key things, first of all, unlike English, German nouns have got a gender, so they can either be masculine, feminine or neuter. The second thing is that the genders normally can't be guessed. So just by looking at a word or just thinking about the meaning, you normally can't work out what the gender is. There are some exceptions. So for example, nouns that relate to people, so aunt and uncle, for example, they follow the genders, but otherwise they're often completely arbitrary. So for example, a lamp is feminine, so die Lampe, whereas a chair is masculine, so it's der Stuhl. So the advice is always that you do need to learn the genders as you're learning the nouns. A key question that people always sort of put to me is, does it actually matter? So first and foremost, people will still understand you even if you get the gender wrong. So if you, for example, said der Lampe, it would grammatically obviously be wrong, but people will still understand you. So I always say to my students and the learners, don't worry too much. Don't worry about getting it wrong to the extent that you don't end up saying things. It's always better to communicate and to say things or to write it down without worrying too much and over worrying about getting the genders wrong. However, having said that, the articles, so the words, the definite article, the word for the, or the indefinite article, the word for a, does obviously differ depending on the gender. So it's either der for masculine, die for feminine, or it's das for neuter. So it does matter if you want to get those right. Also, when you're starting to think about the more advanced grammar, so maybe you're thinking about or you're learning about adjective endings, they will also differ dependent on the noun. So if you want to obviously learn the more advanced grammar, and if you want to get the language correctly, then you would need to know and you need to learn the genders. So when I thought about techniques and tips, I've come up with 5 different ones that some of my learners have sort of reported back as being useful. But obviously if you've got any tips, if you've got any techniques that you use, feel free obviously to comment below, share them with everyone, what works for you, how do you learn the genders. But the 5 techniques that I've thought of are, number 1, learning them off by heart, and I'm going to go through all of those in more depth in a minute. Number 2 would be colour coding them, whether that is in an exercise book or a folder or whether it's electronic. Number 3 would be associating a gender with an arbitrary picture. Number 4 would be linking nouns of the same gender and then constructing a story, or it could be a poem, etc., where you group them together. And then the 5th technique will be to actually learn the rules. So there are some rules, but unfortunately they don't apply to all of the nouns, but there are some that you could learn. So I'll go through each one of them now in a little bit more depth and explain it and try to illustrate how it could work. The first method would be to learn the genders off by heart as you are learning a noun. So maybe if you've got 10 words, for example, that you learn every day, it could be that 3 of them, 5 of them are nouns, and then I would suggest that you per day focus on one particular gender. So you could say, for example, if you're learning language related to speaking on the telephone, that you pick out all of the masculine nouns, for example, learn them on one day, maybe it could be 3, 5 on one day, feminine ones on another day, neuter ones on the third day. And then obviously you'd sort of test yourself, and you would obviously write them down in an exercise book, write them down in an electronic resource, but only focus and only stick to one gender on each given day. The second method would be to colour code them. So you could, as you've seen here in my example, you could have a table, and it could obviously be in, paper-based, or it could be in an electronic spreadsheet. Maybe you might be using Quizlet, and then you might say, for example, that all of the masculine nouns would be blue, feminine ones red, neuter ones green, but obviously you would choose the colours. And then if you are someone who finds that useful, and if that works for you, then you might remember that Hund was masculine, so der Hund, the dog, and you might then remember, yes, it was in blue in my exercise book, in my folder, therefore it must be masculine. You might remember that cat, so die Katze, was in red, and then you'd hopefully remember, yes, therefore it was feminine. And the horse, das Pferd, would be in green, so you would think, yes, that's neuter, so therefore it must be das Pferd. The third method would be associating arbitrary pictures with a particular gender. So quite a few students, when they try it, actually find that this is a really useful way of doing it, especially if you're quite a visual learner. So the idea is that you're going to pick 3 completely arbitrary pictures, and you're going to give each one a gender. So for example, like I've done, the picture of a beach is masculine, picture of a forest is feminine, and picture of a mountain is neuter. So what you would do is, you'd either have this picture electronically stored somewhere on the computer, etc., or you'd actually print it out and you might enlarge it. And then every time you learn, or every time you come across a new noun, you would put it into that particular picture. So if you've printed it off, you could write it in. If it's on the computer, you could just put in a text box and just write that particular noun in there. And then when it comes to remembering the word, you would just hopefully be able to remember where it was, so which picture was it in, which scene was it in, and that would help you to remember it. So in this example here, if we say that the beach is masculine, and you'd have der Hund, the dog, written on the beach, you might just remember that, yes, the dog was on the beach, it was running on the beach, it was walking on the beach, playing on the beach, and so you'd hopefully then remember that der Hund is masculine, so that would be the association there. The fourth method, or the fourth technique, is where you're linking nouns of the same gender together and you're creating a story. And the story could be very funny, it could be memorable, it could be quirky, so it would be one that hopefully you would remember. So just to give you one example, let's just say you're trying to remember animals. So our story here is, the cat is chasing a mouse who is helped by a friendly giraffe and a grumpy snake. So in this example, all of the nouns are feminine, and because it's a bit of an unusual story, if you could visualize it, for example, and then learn it off by heart, you would then remember that all of those nouns are feminine. And then the final method, or the final technique, is to learn the rules. So even though the nouns are fairly sort of arbitrary and they don't really relate, or they don't relate to the meaning in most cases of the noun, there are some rules that you can learn and that might help you. Some people find that really useful, some people really like it, and they say, yes, I absolutely want to learn those rules, and then hopefully be able to work out, when I learn a new word, what the gender is. There are some problems though. So number one, there are a lot of rules, okay? So there are quite a lot of them, and some people find that to learn all of them it's just too much, and they think, I might as well just learn the words, I might as well just learn the genders of the nouns and the articles. The second problem is that they don't apply to every single noun. So just because you've learned lots of rules doesn't mean that it covers every noun. So the third issue is that there are exceptions. So you might have learned the rules, you might come across a word where you think, oh yes, absolutely, it must be this particular gender according to the rule. It could be an exception. But nevertheless, a lot of people like learning the rules, and it does help, obviously, in a lot of cases. So just to give you an example, there's one rule where words that have come from another language tend to be neuter. So for example, cafe, the cafe is neuter, so it's das Kaffee. Another one would be mobile phone, which is handy, and that is also neuter. Another couple of examples here, words or nouns beginning with ge tend to be neuter. So for example, the word for vegetables, it starts with ge, it's Gemüse, and that is das, so it's das Gemüse. Another example would be nouns ending in ig tend to be masculine. So for example, the word for honey is Honig, and it's der Honig. So at this point now, because you've got quite a lot of the rules, I have put them together in a document and uploaded that to my website. So it's free for you to access that, and at this point you might want to go to the website and just have a look at the rules. And I've also created an activity that you can do, and just to use the rules and just to sort of try and learn them and try and actually put them into practice. I really hope that you found this useful and that you enjoyed it and that you got something from it. And if so, obviously feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, comment below if you've got any feedback, any suggestions, or if you've got any techniques that have worked for you and that you found helpful. Aber für heute, vielen Dank und auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.